Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming today to the Democracy at Risk report launch. My name's Sarah Barton. I lead the University of Manchester's Digital Futures platform. Digital Futures is a platform that encompasses all areas of digital research at the University of Manchester, and today's event is a joint event between our Citizens and Government theme and our Digital Trust and Security theme on the topic of democracy at risk around the launch of the Democracy at Risk report. The format for today's event will take a 15-minute presentation on the report, followed by input from 3 respondents on each of the 3 key areas of the report. Please do input your questions into the chat throughout the presentations, and the final section of the event will be a Q&A responding to your questions from the panel. I'll hand over now to Ariadne to present on the report itself.
Thank you, Sarah. So hi, my name's Ariadne Tsenina, and well, I'm about to start sharing my screen first. I just realized. There we go. Okay, and so in this 15 minutes, I'm going to just give a brief overview of our report, which stemmed from a project called Democracy at Risk at the University of Manchester, which was launched last year in January. And the principal investigators for the project were Professors Rachel Gibson and Emma Barrett. And myself, I joined the team as a research associate in January 2020. The main aim of what we'd set out to do was to learn more about the potential online harms to democracy that stems primarily from digital technologies and AI. And so we set out the question of, what can the existing research tell us about specifically 2 types of harm: the digital political micro-targeting and online misinformation. And as well, a little bit more about a solution that is commonly proposed as one of the main pathways to tackling these 2 types of harm. So that is digital information literacy. And our aim was to conduct a multidisciplinary literature review. And we sought to, because there's a lot of very interesting research on online harms from different disciplines, including computer science, political science, psychology, data science. And we wanted to make the disciplines speak to each other, and also to make current research, more recent research, speak to the traditions within each discipline, to try and piece some pieces of the puzzle together. And we followed up this literature review with 3 academic workshops attended by some leading experts in these 3 fields. And we had some really fantastic discussions, and we're very grateful to the contributions that were made by those experts, because they really helped us to sharpen our thinking further. And so the rest of my presentation, I'm going to just go over the headlines for the report, really. Sort of some of the key conclusions that we reached. So first, let's begin with digital political micro-targeting. And by that, we're really talking about online advertising that is using personal data about people to determine whether, what, and how political adverts are shown to them on digital platform, typically social media. And the aim of these adverts is crucially to influence their behavior and political attitudes. And with the digital political micro-targeting, we had 3 major questions in mind that we thought were quite relevant and could be answered using existing research. And the first of this is, can this practice be used to steal elections through subliminal persuasion? And this question is sort of influenced by the Cambridge Analytica and the psychographic sort of scandals and concerns that emerged out of that. The second question was, does this practice receive adequate oversight and regulation? And the third question was, does it incentivize problematic political behavior or problematic patterns? And so just briefly, I guess our answers to these big questions could be summarized as the following. So in regards to the first question, we conclude that it's probably unlikely that this practice could be used to steal elections through this sort of subliminal persuasion. And by persuasion, we really mean encouraging people to change a pre-existing political belief to something that's completely different. And in the report, we list many reasons for this that add up to our sort of conclusion. And that is that this technique seems to have quite low persuasive power, this sort of ability to change political beliefs and attitudes, crucially change them, not just strengthen them. Also, that specialists and campaign managers, as advertising their services, tend to oversell the effectiveness of these strategies. Crucially, mistargeting can happen, and it can be quite costly for campaigns because voters will punish campaigns if they're mislabeled and receive the wrong advert that wasn't aimed at them specifically. And overall, digital micro-targeting, in order to be really influential and sort of result in dramatic changes in electoral results, depends on a very sophisticated and accurate campaign strategy to underpin it. And so therefore many different factors should be in place before it can amount to something like stealing an election. So with regard to the second question, however, we conclude in the opposite direction, that we did uncover literature's pointing to quite severe gaps in oversight and regulations. And in our report, we list some particularly striking examples of this. That includes the fact that the UK electoral law was last reformed in 2001, which predates the era of digital campaigning and the emergence of social media platforms. And that there are no explicit requirements for digital political micro-targeting under the EU's GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation, and the various ambiguities in wording and the various derogations can enable loopholes. That means that campaigns can potentially process personal data without consent from the voters. In addition to this, the severe gaps in ad monitoring, and that is the various ad libraries that social media platforms have created to try and improve transparency. However, there are various problems with the way that these are managed. There aren't robust standards for this. Ads have been reported to go missing in the past. There's also opaque, we know relatively little about the automated decision-making that's involved in the delivery of these adverts, and by that I mean primarily the delivery algorithms. It's hard to audit them, and to some extent the companies themselves are limited in what they can tell us and what they themselves know about this sort of machine learning processes behind the delivery of political ads online. And also there are gaps to the extent to which citizens themselves can engage in oversight. So we found that it takes a long time for users to read Facebook privacy policies. On average, privacy policies require university level reading skills. And so it's hard for users to access it, and it's hard for them to engage in meaningful controls of the data, of the way in which their data is used, and the reasons for which they are targeted by political campaigns. So there's a existing literature points to severe problems with this respect. And finally, does digital political micro-targeting incentivize problematic political behavior? And for this, we looked back at more sort of traditional research in political science and tried to connect it with some of the more recent research. And we conclude that it's possible that it could encourage particularly 4 types of political behavior from campaigns that could cause problems for democracy in the long run. And these are political redlining. And by that we mean really excluding certain categories of voters from communication because they're deemed to be less valuable to campaigns in terms of the likelihood of reacting positively to a political message. Engaging in voter suppression, so actively encouraging voters to not to turn out. And focusing more on particularistic policies, so policies that might benefit small groups in the short term, but are ultimately collectively quite bad. So the idea is to try and offer, I guess, sort of treats to certain categories of voters in the hope of securing their votes. And finally, an overemphasis on wedge issues. So these are divisive issues such as immigration, sexuality, and other similar issues that probably create conflict within the group. We find that research suggests that in targeted communication, political campaigns are more likely to emphasize these wedge issues as a way of distinguishing themselves from other campaigns and encouraging voters to support them at election time. And so what this amounts to, the way our team began to view digital political micro-targeting, is a sort of a trade-off between values for the value that this practice generates for campaigns and the harms that it generates for democracy. And unfortunately, as I try to symbolize here by this diagram, democracy comes out overall as potentially a loser in the long term from this. And so the value for campaigns is actually quite little, because you know, we find that literature points to the fact that this practice is an imprecise tool with few predictable measurable effects on voter behavior. So it's really hard to guarantee that this will result in the desired outcome, that people will change their opinions, that people will turn out. And the trade-off for democracy, the harms are fourfold. So two of them are stemming from these gaps in oversight, and that is that if we can't check on political ads, and we can't you know, ensure transparency, and we can't check that they're obeying by various sort of offline campaign rules, but also that they're making truthful promises and they're sticking to them, then that means overall that we can't hold those elected, we can't hold them to account. And that also erodes trust and ultimately with the legitimacy of democracy as a system. And the harms that stem from the political behavior that it emphasizes are twofold. And that is ultimately, if political redlining and voter suppression, if digital political micro-targeting encourages these behaviors from campaigns, then ultimately that will likely reduce participation and therefore inclusion with it. And ultimately, if we're focusing on very small, particularistic policy promises and wedge issues, we have difficulty with forming collective agenda, which is fundamental to democracy. This idea that there is a collective will, and even if you don't agree with it, you play, you know, you accept the fact that it determines the direction of policy in the near future if it's majority. So these sort of fragmented policies and divisive positions are likely to undermine the sort of collective agenda and therefore with it representation. And so on that basis, we have three general recommendations to do with digital political micro-targeting. And the first of that is to focus on building and strengthening oversight. And that could be updating electoral legislation. It could be focusing on creating robust industry standards for ad libraries, so for these social media companies and other tech companies. Focusing on delivering audits of the ad delivery algorithms, and possibly even limiting the number of political ads, because one of the problems is that the fact that campaigns are able to generate millions and millions of ads means that the overstretched regulatory bodies are at the moment struggling to you know, even sift through this information to check its compliance with existing regulation. And the second set of recommendations is to alter incentives. So try and make digital micro-targeting more hybrid. So for example, instead of allowing for dark posts, so these are posts that are ultimately unpublished but are stored somewhere in an ad library at most, if that, to be used for micro-targeting. Instead, to only allow posts that are already published to social media pages of, for example, campaigns or political parties, to increase the visibility and therefore sort of shift incentives and make things more transparent. Also, possibly other ideas could be to issue user notices of apologies if standards were breached. So again, to increase visibility and sort of potentially the cost of not following regulations or industry practices. And there's also a question about raising maximum financial penalties, because we consistently found that experts and literature point to the fact that current financial penalties are in themselves so low that they don't act as an efficient deterrent for breaching various regulations and existing rules for campaigns. And finally, another way of both altering incentives and strengthening oversight is to focus on empowering citizens. And the different ways in which you can empower citizens is you could allow them to opt out of political advertising. You could focus on improving their controls that they have over the tracking data and the grounds upon which they're targeted. And crucially also investing in digital information literacy for citizens as well. So citizens can exercise some sort of bottom-up power over political campaigns. And so the second section of the report then focuses on the second harm, which is online misinformation. And by this we meant we conceptualize it as an umbrella term that covers both misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And sometimes people like to distinguish between those three types of, I guess, problematic information. But we purposefully chose to use it more as an umbrella term. And one of the reasons for this is that the more we read and the more we talked about what online misinformation entails, we realized that it actually represents an ecosystem. So the lines between misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are actually quite blurry, and problematic information typically evolves and transforms as it is shared and gains and changes momentum. And by the ecosystem, we mean that there are various different actors involved, and that includes state actors. So we've heard a lot about state-sponsored agencies in Russia, in Iran, and China, but also we mean domestic political actors, public figures and influencers, the media, third-party agents. So these are people who are looking to make money out of disinformation or misinformation and fake news, and also citizens themselves who are either intentionally or unintentionally sharing problematic information further. And we were quite interested in what effects of misinformation have been identified that have implications for political behavior. And specifically, our report highlights 4 types of effects, and we find that online misinformation can reinforce political beliefs. So this is quite different to changing. This is more about entrenching existing beliefs and making them stronger. So this sort of idea of confirmation bias sort of mechanism there. Also, we find that online misinformation makes people more distrustful and more cynical. So once people are exposed, studies have shown that once people are exposed to misinformation, overall it's not necessarily about the actual the information itself, the actual claim, but about the overall perception of, for example, an organization that is related to it. And crucially, it's very difficult to correct that. So the conclusion people reach are that any opinion, even if it's by an expert and even if it's scientifically backed, is subject to politically motivated interpretation and therefore can't be trusted. The third effect is apathy, and with that, resignation, withdrawal. So because there's a perception, the perception that misinformation is widespread increases the cognitive demand for citizens. So it makes it very hard to distinguish between truths and problematic claims. And so as a result, people can react in a way that makes them shut down and limit their consumption of news, for example, overall. And so that has implications for their inclusion, their participation in society and politics. And finally, we also find the effect of polarization. So this is kind of linked to the fact that misinformation tends to encourage the entrenchment of pre-existing political beliefs. So it pushes people apart and makes that divide sharper and starker. But also, because it's hard to figure out sometimes who is posting some of this information online and whether they are who they say they are, there are risks that people can assume identities of a different type of group and use that to trick others and provoke a negative reaction, therefore sort of fueling conflict between different social groups. And from that, we can see a range of problems for democracy, a wide range of harms. So this is, some of that is the entrenchment of these political beliefs that are not supported by evidence. And to an extent, we've seen that with the storming of the Capitol in the US and various activities of, I think it's called Pizzagate or something, where people have stormed pizza restaurants because they believed in conspiracy theories. With that, there's a loss of trust in the political actors and democratic institutions as a whole, and that in the long term can undermine legitimacy of democracy again. Another byproduct of that could be that government guidance could be more distrusted, and therefore its impact is reduced, which, as we're currently seeing in times of crises, is quite a significant harm to well-being, let alone our political system. As I said before, it could lower political participation, make people withdraw, and the polarization means that it's very difficult to again tap into that sort of fundamental element of democracy, which is about accepting collective will and agenda, because it makes it difficult to try and understand why some people hold different views to you, different political beliefs to you, and not only to make it difficult to understand it, but also accept their justifications as being legitimate. And finally, this is a point about the fact that there are different actors involved in this. So the involvement of foreign actors undermines the principle of democratic sovereignty, because we're allowing access to people who would not have a legal right to influence politics within our country's borders to do so. And so other things we consider about misinformation are about the solution side of it. And just to quickly sort of run through that is we consider the effectiveness of fact-checking as well as inoculation. And inoculation being very specific, factually correct messages that predate or try to predict and preempt problematic claims, and therefore sort of settle in people's minds earlier and faster, and therefore make it difficult for misinformation to shift that. And we conclude that fact-checking is valuable, but it's on its own, it's not enough to protect voters. And the way we talk about it in the report is a kind of imperfect filter. So if you think about sort of, for example, a coffee filter, whilst it's quite good at filtering out quite major pieces of misinformation, ultimately there's always some residue at the bottom of your cup. And it's the same with misinformation, that even claims that have been subjected to fact-checking, and even when people accept the fact that a piece of information was false, for example, as it was when it was shared by a political figure, their opinions and their political beliefs are actually quite resistant to change. Which means that misinformation can continue to exert influence, often actually subconscious, so people aren't really aware that they're continuing to act on biases that were instilled by misinformation in the first place. And with inoculation, we find that the literature shows that it's a promising tool, that it is effective, but it's very difficult to make these very precise, short messages that, that need to be quite specific, and there's a lot of calculation that is involved beforehand, because we have to be able to predict misinformation or disinformation operations. It's very difficult to make that mass scale, and there's also questions about whether the research has been there's enough research testing this beyond the laboratory or beyond the experimental settings, so in real life. And so our recommendations to do with online misinformation are about encouraging collaboration and the sharing of responsibility to prevent and deter the spread of it. And that means that we should, governments, media agencies, tech companies, even including citizens, should recognize that the involvement and interdependence of many different actors, and therefore shared responsibility within that ecosystem of misinformation. And where possible, organizations that have the power to do so should help these various actors to make the right choices within that digital information landscape. And we should prioritize preventive rather than corrective measures, because the corrective measures that we talked about, like fact-checking, are useful, but they're not, they should be seen as sort of a last resort. They're not enough to protect citizens in the long term. And finally, linked to that is to think about improving sanctions for non-compliance and negligence that relate to misinformation. And so that sort of takes us to the final section of the report, which is digital information literacy. And our definition of digital information literacy is actually quite complex. And we've built this up by consulting different types of, different strands of research in media literacy, information literacy, critical thinking. And what we come up with these 5 types of skills or knowledge, and that includes functional skills, so being able to use your computer, technical understanding, so knowing how information is created, shared, stored, distributed online, the critical thinking skills, but also in addition to this, and we found that the numbers 4 and 5 in particular are emphasized by experts in media literacy and digital information literacy, it's not enough to possess these skills, it's important to apply them, and it's important to be willing to engage in behavioral change, and it's important for sense making to be with respect to the wider community, not just yourself. So digital information literacy is actually quite a complex set of skills and knowledge that should be fostered amongst all of us. I think probably most of us, actually all of us, have more to learn with respect to each of those bullet points, I think. And when we looked at the digital information literacy in the UK, we found 3 challenges. And the first of this is that there is there's a lack of an overarching strategic framework when it comes to digital information literacy in education, whether it's primary, secondary, or further. And the current school curriculum, although the fundamentals of digital information literacy can be found in it, together that does not translate into action, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And crucially, none of this is underpinned by support for teachers. So teachers are poorly prepared at the moment to facilitate digital information literacy in schools. And so what do I mean by it not translating into action? So if you think about the 3 sort of types of digital information literacy pillars that you can find in schools in the curriculum. So critical thinking, interrogation of evidence, we can pick up in subjects like maths, English, science. The functional skills and technical understanding you could pick up from subjects like computing. The communal sense making and the media landscape, we can pick up understanding of that through subjects like citizenship, politics, and media studies. And you think that together they would amount to some kind of formation of active digital information literacy habits. However, what we find is that in the current literature, and experts are telling us that these connections are not made. In fact, they're non-existent. So digital information literacy habits are not formed effectively through the current school curriculum in Britain. And that means that the burden of doing that falls primarily on the student, and teachers are currently not well supported to help build those connections either. And so our recommendations based on that is to recognize the strategic importance of digital information literacy, make this a core cross-subject component, so build these links between these sort of different types of components in the curriculum, and ensure that the support for this type of literacy is holistic, so ensure that it's not just about students, but it's also about teachers and adequate school funding and various bottom-up initiatives. So I'll leave it there and I'll pass on to Rachel, who's one of the principal investigators for our project, and she'll introduce the other speakers today.
Thank you very much, Ariadna. That was a great overview. And we have 3 respondents who have agreed to give us their thoughts and advice, particularly around sort of policy recommendations and what we can do with some of the points that we've raised in the report. So my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kate Donnett, Professor Martin Innes, and Dr. Kari Kivinen. We're going to go in that order, and I'll just say a few words about their expertise. They've been brought in because they each specialise in one of the 3 areas of the report. So Dr. Kate Donnett is a colleague and friend from the University of Sheffield, senior lecturer. She is an expert on digital micro-targeting, having been a special advisor for the House of Lords Select Committee on Democracy and Digital Technology. She works very closely on the issues of regulation and in terms of the sort of issues are basically around democracy and online political advertising. So she's going to give us her thoughts on the part of the report that deals with digital micro-targeting. Professor Martin Innes is the director of the Crime and Security Institute at Cardiff University. He is an expert on digital misinformation, amongst other hats that he wears. He's also an expert on counterterrorism, neighbourhood policing, and he has a project, actually OSCAR, the Open Source Communication Analytics and Research Centre, that looks particularly around areas of disinformation, misinformation around elections. And then Dr. Kari Kavinen. Dr. Kavinen is an education outreach expert at the EU's Intellectual Property Office Observatory. He has, I think, dedicated his professional career to looking at the links between education research and school system reform, both in Finland and also internationally. And since 2017, has led the pedagogical development work at Faktabari, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, EDU, which is Digital Information Literacy Service, where he's worked on building up fact-checking methodologies and co-authored and piloted varying materials and methods at schools in Finland and internationally to improve digital literacy in schools. So without further ado, I shall cross over to Kate to give us her response. And then once Kate's finished, I will cross to Martin and then Kari, and then we will open the floor to questions. Okay, so I think is Kate.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thank you for such an amazing overview of the report. I've really enjoyed reading it, and I think you've done a really excellent job of navigating a path through a very complicated landscape. And I really want to praise the work that you've done in doing that, because not only do we have a whole range of different academic sources and insights here, but there are also a whole range of different audiences who are thinking about these particular debates, and that does throw up a lot of challenges when trying to work out what to do. So what I'm going to do is focus on the recommendations and think about potentially how we might want to rethink these and potentially offer a little bit of a challenge, which I hope will be taken in the spirit it's intended, which is just to offer a slightly different perspective. So the recommendations in the area of micro-targeting are in 3 areas, and I think they're really useful. So they're around strengthening oversight, altering incentives, and empowering citizens. And I think at essence, there's nothing there that I disagree with, but the challenge that I would like to make is, I wonder if there's a kind of unanswered question that's within the report and within these recommendations, and that is, what is it that these recommendations are trying to achieve? Or to put it slightly differently, like, what are they solving for in democratic terms? And the reason that I want to ask this question is, I've been doing a lot of thinking over the last year or so about what it is that's problematic about these trends and what it is that we are trying to create when we talk about democracy and when we talk about protecting democracy from risks. Because I think that we tend to assume that we're all talking about the same thing and that we all share ideals. And some of the work I've been doing analysing policymakers' rhetoric in the UK and the US shows that there actually is quite a different set of understandings about what it is that's problematic about these technologies and what it is that we therefore need to do. And I wonder if some of that ambiguity about, well, what is it about micro-targeting that's really problematic? You need that alternative of, like, what is the clear democratic good that we're trying to establish here? And there was a really useful report published last week by the Australian Parliament, I believe in Victoria, talking about the positives and negatives of micro-targeting. And that also sparked for me another thought, which is, not only what are we doing this for and trying to prevent, but also, are there positive ways that micro-targeting can be used? And I think at the moment, because of the questions that you've asked, the recommendations are very much focused on mitigating the negatives. But is it actually possible to think about how micro-targeting could be used to exert positive influences that help to promote the types of democratic ideals that we might want to see? And I think in presenting the report, I really liked the kind of contrast between the benefits for campaigners and the harms for democracy. But I wonder if maybe framing it slightly differently to unpin that even further might help as well, which is, the impact of these things on individuals, on parties and campaigners, and I do think it's important to look beyond parties, but then also on society as a whole. And I think that kind of thinking for me is important, because actually there are lots of different ways in which microtargeting could feature in society. So if you think about microtargeting and its relationship to an individual, it could actually be very positive. It could help give people more information that's more relevant to them. It could engage them. It could therefore drive participation. Similarly, for parties and campaigners, it could potentially lower costs. It could encourage, under the right conditions, it could encourage campaigners to speak to different audiences. And at a societal level, you could see either a kind of like a richer, more informed debate occurring, with people actually given and being engaged on their messages. But I think the interesting things about thinking about these different levels is that they do stand in tension, and there are different democratic goals which you have to play off and trade off against one another, right? So if we decide that the most important thing is to have common public discourse, then that might mean that we're saying that having an informed and engaged public is something that is a lower priority, because they could potentially stand in conflict as enacted through microtargeting. So I think these kind of questions are the kind of things I've been wrangling with, because they're not easy to resolve and they require trade-offs. But I wonder if thinking through then how they might manifest in your recommendations, whether it's worth thinking about what are the implications of the different recommendations for these different groups. So the one that particularly jumped out to me was limiting the number of ads on political campaigns. Who would that benefit and who would it potentially harm if that step was taken? Because although at a potential societal level, I think you could prevent the fragmentation of debates, and if that's the key thing, that would be a great outcome. But it could potentially mean that individuals were seeing adverts that were less engaging or less tailored to their individual interests. And similarly, it could make it harder for parties to campaign. So there's trade-offs that are inherent within that recommendation that I wonder if it might just be worth unpicking. Because an alternative would be something like limiting the degree to which it's possible to target, or you can't target below the constituency level or the ward level, for example. And that kind of recommendation would be balancing those imperatives in a slightly different way, which is, you would be able to have some targeting, so individuals would still get relevant information, but you would potentially be mitigating that potential effect of having a highly fragmented discourse. So I realise I'm kind of throwing a theoretical question at you, which is quite difficult to unpick, but I think I would maybe encourage you to think about, is there a unifying vision of democracy that underpins the recommendations that are being put forward? And I think that is it's a really difficult question to answer, and I think it's something that is kind of currently not really happening in many of the policy debates I'm seeing, and I think therefore you end up seeing policies being suggested that could potentially pull in different ways. So that was the main thing that I wanted to say. The other thing I was wondering about is I was fascinated by the altering incentives, because I think, again, I really agree with everything that you have under this heading, but I kept thinking, are these actually incentives or are they penalties? Because fines doesn't feel like an incentive to me. So I was wondering, is there potential to have some more incentives or some reasons for people to use microtargeting in a positive way? And one of the things that keeps getting talked about in this debate is the potential for a code of conduct. And I was thinking, could you have a kite mark for positive microtargeting practice, where a regulator sets up a good practice system that helps reward campaigners and helps provide a positive signal to individual citizens that microtargeting is being used in a way that is incompatible with democratic norms? Or could you do something like compel social media companies to provide freely available lists of hard to reach voters that campaigns could access for free, and so that they would be communicating with groups that we currently feel are marginalised from our debate and getting that privileged access. So I wondered if there were things that could be done, could be also added into these that would really help promote the kind of positive democratic goals that you are interested in promoting, as well as mitigating the democratic risks that I think you do a really excellent job of highlighting. Just finally, I think there was a prompt in the notes to the speakers to think about the barriers. And I think that there are so many barriers to achieving change in this space, and it's incredibly difficult. But I wonder if one of the things is around the lack of a consensus about what it is that we're trying to achieve in this space. And I've seen from a whole range of different actors, different recommendations around micro-targeting. You know, Who Targets Me have got this amazing list that's really good. There's been some excellent stuff come out of Mozilla and the European Commission. But potentially what there isn't is this vision of what it is that we want micro-targeting to be within our democracy. And so I think this report could potentially help try and articulate that, as well as to add something to what you've already got, which I think is a really excellent summary of where we are right to be concerned and where the concerns are lacking. So I think that's what I'll end on, is just a provocation, if you're interested in taking it, to maybe flip the lens that you come at this question with, and to potentially think about some of the positive ways in which micro-targeting can feature in society. But I'll leave it there, and I really, really enjoyed reading the report.
Thanks very much, Kate. And yes, I do think that we do take that on board. We'll come back to that probably in the discussion, because I'll let Ariadne have a think about it actually while Martin's giving his comments. So Martin, if you'd like to just take the floor, it is yours to tell us your thoughts on particularly, obviously the report as a whole, but particularly around the misinformation side, and any recommendations from your research that you think we should be taking on board.
Great, thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, everybody. So I guess the real take home for me from the misinformation section was the concept that it functions like an ecosystem, and I really like that idea. But I think I kind of suggest that you might want to take that a bit further, because I thought what was really nice about the report and what I really enjoyed is joining up the problem. So not just thinking about misinformation, but how in the context of particular elections does misinformation interact with micro-targeting and other kinds of problematic behaviours in terms of how they're experienced by citizens. And interestingly, later on this afternoon, I'm running a briefing to the German government, 6 departments of the German government, on what's coming up at the moment there. And you can see precisely this. It's not just that there's misinformation and disinformation, it's you've got all of these different things going on simultaneously and concurrently, driven by a range of actors with very different motivations. And it's the aggregate effect that I think is deeply troubling. So I thought there was an opportunity there for you to kind of take that forward. And in terms of thinking about the implications, maybe 3 or 4 kind of little points. The first is thinking about the ways in which this whole space around doing something about misinformation and disinformation is evolving quite rapidly, and the ways that might induce other kinds of social problems and political problems. So in particular, there is a considerable movement amongst some of the major platforms at the moment to police or moderate content far more than they were doing previously. So previously their kind of intervention rationale was always what they refer to as coordinated inauthentic behaviour. Now they're engaging far more about harmful content. And I'm not sure if anybody saw it, but on Friday, Facebook took down a load of German Querdenker pages on the basis of COVID-related harmful content. So in some ways that's good, because we're kind of getting some of this stuff out. But I do worry that it's going to induce other problems further down the line about equity, about which stuff gets taken down and which stuff doesn't, who makes the decisions about what is sufficiently harmful that it warrants deplatforming. So that's one angle of it. And I think we also need to think about the recommendations you offer in relation to government working with platforms. The incentives for government and platforms are not the same. For platforms, really, they're quite happy with the displacement effect, which is if we can get it off our platform, the problematic behaviour, that's okay. Manage our reputation, that's okay. Government has a far more difficult, deeper kind of problem to solve about how do we do something about the fundamentals of these behaviours that are presenting as misinformation and disinformation. So I think thinking about the tensions there are quite important. You also refer to democracy kind of more generally, but context matters in terms of how much of a problem this is. So one of the things we did as part of the work I've been leading is we did a survey across 12 countries of citizens and their experiences and vulnerabilities to disinformation. And even within Europe, there are very, very different kind of vulnerabilities that you're talking about. So actually the solutions need to be tailored to the vulnerabilities relating to different cultures and different contexts. And I think maybe that just needs bringing through a bit more when you refer to democracy as a kind of concept. In practical terms, it matters where you are in the country. And then I guess final point would be really, I've come to the view that our responses to disinformation are as much part of the problem as its transmission. In particular, the 19th century structures of government seem absolutely inadequate to deal with these kind of problems and the ways in which information flows at the current times. So, and I can tell you, because this is a lot of the work that we do, is there is a real attribution challenge around this. You can see it's disinformation or it's misinformation, but working out precisely who's responsible for that is often really, really hard, and particularly as the bad actors have got kind of more sophisticated in terms of their techniques. But government wants to know, well, who's responsible? Because if it's coming from overseas, then it goes to the Foreign Office. If it's coming from home, it goes to the Home Office or Department of Culture and Media and Sport. And I just think in terms of getting something done about this, there are an awful lot of problems to be solved. It doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't try, but there is, it's more than just problematic information that's part of the problem here. So I'm going to stop there and pass over.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Again, more food for thought. We will definitely take those positions on board and those comments on board. I like the idea, as you said, the aggregate kind of effect aspect of the sum of the parts and the whole, and there's something here which we haven't necessarily considered till now, which is sort of how these things all fit together and the ecosystem. So that's really important to think about. I'll pass now to Kari, who's our final speaker or respondent, to share his thoughts on the digital information literacy aspects of the report. So Kari, please, the floor is yours.
I have decided to do something different. I'm not commenting the document and the study because I find it really well made. Adriani made a very good introduction to it, especially on the digital information literacy side. I'm telling you what we are doing in the north part of Finland, and I hope that it gives kind of new ideas for you and new perspective, because we are speaking exactly on the same things. We have same kind of conclusions, and we are struggling with the same issues. So first of all, there is a link between information and democracy. I mean, people should have access to the reliable information in order to make good decisions. And especially students and young people should have quality information so that they can base whatever choices are based on something which is factual. Also, the UNESCO has stated that in the media and information literacy laws, law number 2, that media and information literacy is a nexus to human rights. So it's very much linked. And now I'm coming to the difference of information literacy and digital information literacy, because it's a little bit blurred. British librarians have been absolutely outstanding on the information literacy. If you go to any library, you can find a book, you can find the information. Encyclopedia Britannica is a wonderful example of a good information source. And the problem is that the online environment has completely replaced the old traditional methods of finding information. Not completely, but very much. When you look at the encyclopedia, some information, you ended up by finding one information made by specialists, trustfully edited, and you would be happy. If you go to Google, you get millions or hundreds of millions hits. And it's left to you as an individual to choose which of this information you get is the good one. And the same goes with the libraries. Librarians are able to help you to find the information in a book, well classified in a certain shelf. But when you go to the social media, you make a research, you get whatsoever. And just an example, on Saturday, I found 800 million hits for climate change and 2,000 million hits on COVID-19 vaccine. And who is the editor? Who is the one who decides what is the information? It's you, me, and every citizen. The problem is that these algorithms which are giving this information, they are not transparent. Third party can influence them, and actually you can buy priority position in the search. So we are kind of left in a new area. And some researchers are speaking the differences between online and offline environments. And actually it's proposed that we should learn to read in a new way in the online environment. If we are using the traditional methods, we will spend our attention, our time on totally useless text. We are kind of getting totally exhausted by the amount of information which are there. The platforms, I'm sorry to say, they try to maximize their commercial interest. And if it's good for them to do some kind of limitation of something, they do it. But we have seen in Russia this week, they have closed the democratic options, which is totally unbelievable. They do their utmost to capture the attention of anybody. They try to monetize the data they get from us. I give to Facebook information about myself, and they are selling it further to the commercial or political or whatsoever actors. And they are having absolutely wonderful tools to predict our consumption behavior, our future actions, also our political choices. So it can lead to the problems. There are many problems, but I don't want to, I go for the solutions. And there is a wonderful research done by Max Planck Institute, Kosireva et al., where they are proposing that there are 4 angles we can enter this digital world. First of all, law, regulations. Like Martin was saying, it's very difficult. It's really, really difficult. Ethical guidelines, they can be done, they can be recommended, and this is what we do. Technology, the algorithm can be used also for something good if we want to. There can be ethical choices, ethical designs for architectures. And then we researchers, we should study more, and this is putting also the pressure to you on how to help people in this new online environment, information overview. What kind of traffic information, traffic instructions, booths and nudges we should be given to the guides, how to handle this information overflow. And the next one is the education, what I'm representing. It should be absolutely in the school curricula that pupils learn already in the school all these things. For example, in Finland, we are starting now the new reading skills. The program starts in the early education. We are teaching little children how to use search engines. So in our way, the digital information literacy is defined a little bit differently than in yours. And this is based on old information literacy, but adding the digital approach. And the most important thing there is this information management, how to find information I really need and how to share it correctly. But also this choice needs critical thinking, balanced judgments, and yeah, it's something we can try to teach. And we have found ways how we can help it. And of course, this is leading to empower the citizens to be informed and to engage with the society. I've been working a lot with the Stanford University people, and they have done a lot of studies on civic online reasoning. And they have come to the very strange conclusion that there is so much information in the online environment that we have, instead of starting encouraging people to read and analyze if something is misinformation or disinformation, we should kind of teach them to ignore all the information which seems to be non-important. So they are kind of proposing this kind of strategic ignoring approach. We get so many hits, so let's choose the one which is best for us. And the lateral reading skills, I mean, in our project, in the Faktabari, which I'm representing, we noticed very early stage, about 5 years ago, that fact-checking is always late. It's a kind of reaction to something which is already spread. And we decided that it's also important to launch this educational project, what I've been leading, and to give skills, techniques, support to teachers and students how to deal with this kind of online content. And fact checkers, they don't spend time in reading all the documents because there are so many. You can spend all your life on reading documents, but they are kind of checking where the information comes from, who is behind the information, is there any evidence, what do other sources say, and only when they find this kind of conditions filled, they are going to look at the text. Otherwise, it's skipping. In our packet, we have been practicing to teach teachers how to meet pupils' social media issues in the classroom context, and we have identified a lot of different areas, many similar than you. And the first is this difference between online and offline environment. And also, we have a huge difference of the media landscape of young people and, let's say, us, a little bit older teachers. We use different social media platforms. We get our news from different sources. And in order to have a mutual understanding, it's good to check it first. I would like to go quickly some of these through. When we are speaking about critical thinking, we noticed that some people really took it wrongly. We don't want to be flat out negative. We want that critical thinking is a careful and balanced analytical thinking. We don't want that young people are thinking that everybody lies, don't trust in anything. We don't want to create apatheism or skepticism. And then we noticed that actually people like to have clear checklist, what to do. And these stupid, simple checklists are often helping individuals to cope with the information. What we have tried to say that we want to influence on the 2 seconds when you get the information and you think if I like it or share it, that go through certain questions before that. And we have got a lot of information that this kind of easy checklists are useful. We have noticed that science has lost its value in the social media. If somebody has an opinion about something, it gets much more clicks than let's say, cold-facted scientific statement, which is not exactly stating anything for sure, because scientists are very seldom black and white. So Finnish Academy has decided to launch a campaign for young people in Finland. These are my translations, where they are trying to give kind of a better view of science, what the science really is, to students. We have been proposing to use academic search engines, and surprisingly many don't use them, even in the upper levels. Everybody, it's so easy to use Google or Bing or something else that they are kind of forgotten that these are existing. We are telling about algorithm awareness, data awareness. We are kind of informing how algorithms are working and how you can kind of observe the differences, for example, the search results between different individuals. There is an increasing amount of, let's say, misdeeds, malinformation, which is spread through a combination of shocking pictures or interesting pictures and a text which are kind of not linked or interlinked, without speaking of deep fakes. But we have noticed also that when we teach students to use image search tools, they really like it. It's kind of work of detective. It's something they really learn quickly. We were so worried about the low engagement of Finnish youngsters on the elections, and we created this kind of voter literacy handbook, which is translated also in English, in order to boost the interest of teachers to speak about politics in the school, teachers to kind of ideas which they can do in order to engage students to take position in the local matters. And unfortunately, we did it 2-3 years ago, and the development goes so fast that we should already rewrite it. There are so much new information coming in. In EU, which you have left, we have just created a European Digital Media Observatory. And our project, Faktabari in Finland, was chosen to be part of the members of this observatory. And we have launched only last week a very big research project with the 4 universities in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, where we are studying media and information literacy, and more specifically, digital information literacy. You will hear us later on. It's just starting. And I had a pleasure to, in UK, to participate in teaching citizenship, journal development. There is a special number about information disorder. And by the way, the information disorder combines the misdeeds and malinformation quite nicely. And if you want to read, it was published about a year ago, and there are a lot of interesting articles about your reality in UK. So thank you so much. And I have this list of references, and I'm sorry that I'm not commenting your deal results, but I'm trying to bring something new to the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karian. Yeah, actually, this is exactly what we were looking for in terms of giving us some insights into your own work and how that does link in. So I think it very much forms part of our thinking and helping us kind of develop the report. So actually, yeah, having something new is great. I think also your 4 components in a way are the law and ethics, the technology, the psychology and social science, and also the school curricula sort of link together the prior speakers as well, with Kate talking about the kind of more regulatory environment and Martin talking about the technology and regulation, and then our own, you know, the digital information literacy. So perfect, thank you very much.
Welcome.
So I was going to say, what I might do is just cross back to Ariadna just for initial thoughts, perhaps, if you had any. And I don't want to take you on a sort of a spot, Ariadna, but I just thought it might be useful if you've got some, I mean, obviously I have some thinking as well, but if you had some reactions maybe to the 3 respondents, and then we can, if anybody has questions as well, please either stick the hand up or put something into the chat and I can come back to you. But Ariadna, would you like to just pick up on any of those points?
Well, overall, I was just really pleased with the feedback that we got. So thank you very much, and also for the further comments and the further ideas. And yeah, I really enjoyed listening to all three of those. I was thinking about Kate's because maybe it was first, so it was more fresh in my head. Yeah, I was thinking, you know, I think it really is important to have some kind of explanation about what we mean by democracy and sort of that kind of unifying vision. And the irony being that me and Rachel are working on a paper that is trying to do just that. So I don't know, but maybe we can incorporate some of that in perhaps right at the beginning somewhere. That would be perhaps useful. The only thing about the micro-targeting that I was thinking also is that the trouble is that we're not just dealing with the people doing it and people using technology, but also technology learning and doing it as well. And so some of the controls that we could do that are more positive and that are, you know, even with the best intentions could go wrong, because the algorithms can. I mean, well, I'd be interested to hear what maybe Kate you think about this, whether that is the case. But from what we understood is that the algorithms can skew the distribution, and they can, you know, eventually take it to people and to, you know, the creators of the ads didn't intend themselves, and that's really difficult to control. And some of that could be based on the way that certain types of users are engaging with the advert, whether they're clicking on it, following the links, sharing it, commenting. And so the advert responds to that as positive engagement. I'll show it to more people like this, and eventually that means that actually the audience of certain political ads is actually potentially even targeted on the basis of protected characteristics that you wouldn't even be allowed to target on, and the people who created the advert didn't intend to themselves. And it's these sort of like that machine learning element that is present in digital micro-targeting, I think is posing quite a big curveball potentially to some of these more positive regulations, because again, I guess I'm sort of Kate is adding the optimism when I'm back into the pessimism side. But yeah, that's I don't know whether, Kate, you have any thoughts about the algorithm element of it and the machine learning that is quite hard to control and check as well. Yeah, and with Martin, yeah, with the ecosystem as well, that's really interesting to hear. So would you also recommend that we maybe, you know, when you said that we could take that further, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what you mean? You know, should we sort of go into a bit more detail, or should we present a sort of a more sort of some kind of visualization of it that's a bit stronger? Any thoughts on that would be appreciated as well. And with Kari as well. So first of all, thank you very much for all of those different tools that you described and things that you're doing already. That's brilliant. But also, we do mention Finland in our report a little bit, and the Finnish education system. So if you had any comments on what makes that particularly effective, or the new reforms particularly suitable for the current sort of digital information environment, that would be really brilliant to hear as well, if you can.
Thanks, Ariadna. And just looking through the questions, I can see there's one there actually, which is directed at Martin. So what I might do is just to maybe go back to just the respondents and add in a question for Martin myself, actually, which is just one thing I was going to pop up, was that I just thought Kari's mention of information disorder seemed something I hadn't necessarily come across that before, but as a kind of way of trying to make sense of the misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. It's a new concept that I hadn't sort of come across, and I just wanted to kind of maybe get your thoughts on that. And also maybe if I could push Kari a little bit as well to sort of say, from the Finnish experience and looking at the UK, if you had sort of one recommendation to kind of sort of help in terms of where we are at the moment, and obviously Finland is a leader in this area, perhaps what we could do that would sort of emulate or try to kind of sort of what you would see if you were parachuted in to try to sort of increase our digital information literacy in schools. Where would be of the areas that you've highlighted? What do you think would be a key kind of first step? And yeah, just back to Kate, I agree on the positives and the fact that we've very much concentrated on the negatives, and I just take the point about the carrots and the sticks really, and it's important to kind of have the former as well as the latter. So yeah, so if I can just go back and maybe just pick up with Kate and then Martin and then Kari, and then I'll keep looking for questions in the chat. So yeah, Kate.
Very quickly, I think, Ariadne, what you said about the algorithms is really true, and it's I think one of the major challenges about this space is that actually a lot of it is beyond the control of the policymakers and the individuals who are trying to regulate it, because it is being determined by companies who are incredibly intransparent. I've put a link in the chat for people to look at, which is a podcast about the challenges of actually trying to identify minority audiences using social media. And I think there is a real challenge about the amount of power that we've ceded to these commercial actors who are not being driven by democratic imperatives. So I think, you know, I completely endorse the recommendation that you have of regular audits of algorithms, but I think more broadly than that, just opening up and ensuring that democratic actors and researchers and civil society groups have the capacity to be able to, you know, gain information about and review what is happening within these companies. But I would also kind of fall back and saying, you know, a lot of attention does tend to be paid to social media companies and the role that they play. But, you know, micro-targeting can occur on a whole range of different platforms. You know, you can do micro-targeted emails, you can do it on the doorstep. So I do think that we want to make sure that we're not just always focusing on social media platforms, but thinking about how you might be able to use this technique positively in a whole range of different circumstances.
And I'll just cross over to Martin. Actually, Martin, we did have also a question from Kevin Moran from the floor, just to add in, which was that he'd wondered as well if you could maybe talk about which part of the government you think is best placed to take the lead on some of the initiatives that you mentioned, the Home Office, DCMS, the Department for Education, or is it the Cabinet Office? So that was a particular question that popped out from the floor as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Rachel. Just to follow on really from a couple of points that Kate was making. One is thinking about the diversity of platforms and the diversity of algorithms. So I'm really interested in the moment in TikTok. TikTok seems to run in a very, very different way to Facebook and Twitter. Don't quite understand how its algorithm is doing what it's doing. We've tried all sorts of things to try and take it apart. But you've got diversity of algorithm and also the rise of places like Telegram, which everybody, after January the 6th, everybody kind of knows about the story about Gab and Parler kind of benefiting in terms of the influx of users. But actually it's Telegram that's seen the long-term slow growth. And they are ideologically making their case for their position in the market on the basis that they are not going to be regulated in the way that, say, Twitter and Facebook are doing. So, you know, some of the maneuvers that we make create other problems. Second point I kind of like to make is a bit like the ecosystem point, is not necessarily separating social media off from mainstream legacy kind of media. If you look at the Russian Internet Research Agency, for example, they expended an awful lot of effort in trying to get their stuff into mainstream media outlets. We published a report a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the ways in which the reader comment sections of Western media outlets in 16 countries appear to us to being manipulated by what we refer to as pro-Kremlin trolls and then used to create stories off the back of that. So not divorcing social media from mainstream media in terms of the pipeline effect. I mean, one of the, and just as a kind of a byproduct, as a result of putting that report out into the public space, I'm now being trolled by people allied to the Kremlin who are referring to me as a third-rate academic. So you may not want to take anything I take particularly seriously at this point, because they obviously know far better. And then in respect to Kerwin's kind of thing, I think I'm arguing for none of the above. I think I'm arguing for something new that actually reflects the importance of this stuff in the 21st century, rather than being bound by, we've had government departments and that where their missions, their remits were founded in the 19th century or whatever. We probably need something new, because at the moment what we're getting is each department is trying to grow its own little bit of expertise, and then trying to create the links between them. Whereas I think we would be better off in just kind of saying we need a central department for the protection of democracy and disinformation, or something like that, where you actually got a really, really good core team who really, really understood these kind of issues and had the resources to do something about it.
So I was just nodding so much there that I forgot that I was muted. So yeah, so I just would track back to Kari and just ask for any sort of comment to Ariadne's comment or my question as well. Okay, good.
So I'm starting a slide, so again, sorry for that. You asked about Finland, and the only thing to scale up the digital or media information literacy is to do it through teachers and through schools. Otherwise, we can have tens and tens of seminars and webinars and the effect is zero. But if we get it in the curricula and if we get the teachers trained to be using it, then we have a hope that it's going to be done. So in Finland, we are taking media education quite seriously. Multiliteracy, which is our term, which is kind of similar to media and information literacy. And here today we are speaking about information literacy and digital information literacy, which is going down, is part of every curriculum of every subject. And to give some examples of what we are doing at this very moment, we are defining these new reading skills more precisely. And this will come out maybe before Christmas. And to show some of these examples, so it starts with early education and it goes up to the end of obligatory studies. And we have this is, for example, example of information management, that we start with the early age and systematically build in the competencies and the skills to the students. The same, we are promoting inquiry-based work because it's close to science and it's kind of approach which students are forced to deal with research topics, and it's something we will bring in more precisely, let's say, very soon. So my advice for UK is that revise your curricula and start it from early education and bring it all forward. And that's the only way to start. But the real problem is not really the children. The real problem, I've been giving a lot of lectures for elderly people who have lived their lives by trusting printed media and everything edited by journalists, and suddenly they are totally lost. They are easy targets for all kinds of scams and in the online environment. So it's not only children, it's the lifelong learning challenge for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you, Kari. And actually, I noticed as well, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Emma. I know that you're here, just so that as our co-author, if you had any comments or thoughts that you wanted to add to what Ariadne and the panel have said, please do go ahead.
No, I found it fascinating to hear from all three about their thoughts on the report. I'm really interested in that kind of turning the digital micro-targeting on its head and thinking about where it might be useful. I think the most important thing, though, is that there should be a dialogue about this, because at the moment we're kind of sleepwalking into a situation, and we need to think about what the risks might be, and therefore what the mitigations might be, and the benefits as well. So I think that's a really important point that we should definitely take on board. My only comment on Kari's stuff, and I made this to Ariadne when I was kind of reading the final draft of the report, is like, why can't we be more like Finland? It's just such a great idea to get that into the curriculum at an early stage. I don't know what it would take for the UK government to go down that route, but it just seems like an essential point. And then on Martin's points, I share your your concern, Martin, about who the arbiters are of what is good information and bad information, and this idea that everything's being pushed now to the tech companies to make decisions, which feels to me to be fundamentally anti-democratic and makes me very uncomfortable. And it might be that I agree with some of the decisions they're making at the moment, but I might not agree with them in the future. And kind of who has the power to change that? It's something that we put into our response to the online harms bill when that consultation was out kind of a couple of years ago. Was, you know, we're really, you know, what's being proposed here is a situation where the people who make the decisions about what the public should see and not see are tech companies, and that just feels, you know, very wrong. But I'm not sure what the answer is. And as for government reform, absolutely, bring it on. But I'm not holding my breath.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, and actually we did have one question from the floor, which was from Linda, and it was just regarding if anybody has any experience or they've incorporated any ideas about threats to democracy from online gaming platforms. I don't know if that's anything that's kind of been part of the team's research or in any way it's something that people have come across. Don't feel necessarily obliged, but if it is something that you're working on, do feel free to pick it up. I guess it's one for the next report, Ariadne, right? Maybe the next version is something we need to think about, because this is becoming an issue. So let me just check. I don't think I see any more comments, and we're about at the half hour. So assuming there's no other burning issues to raise, I'll just take the opportunity to thank Ariadne for her very, very detailed, but also informative and kind of sort of overview of the project, and compressing an awful lot into to 20 minutes. So thank you so much for that. And of course, to our three respondents, this is, I think we will need a bit of time to absorb and think about how we can incorporate these, because we did ask for specific suggestions, and actually that's very much what we got. So we're really, really pleased with that. Thank you very much for all of your comments and your feedback. They will feature in the report. And so I think I'll hand now back to Sarah just to do some sort of final sort of wrap up and information about the report and where you can get it from when it's available. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Rachel. Just to say thank you everybody for coming today, and please do sign up for the Digital Futures newsletter if you're interested in future events from the Citizens and Government theme, from the Digital Trust and Security theme, and we have a number of cross-theme events suitable for external audiences as well. I know quite a large portion of today's attendees are external attendees, so please do sign up to hear more about our forthcoming activity. We will be sharing the report once any revisions following today's important input have been added to the report. We'll be sharing it with everybody who registered today, and we'll also be putting it on the Digital Futures website as well. Do get in touch with us if you've got any questions for any of the participants today or on any other Digital Futures activity. And thank you for coming. That's it from us.